Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world, the paths Canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences, slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world operates under a quieter, more dangerous delusion in this timeline, that its greatest what if wears a skull-like face or half-moon spectacles. They are wrong. In the polished marble corridors of a future ministry, the most feared name is neither Voldemort nor Dumbledore. It is Minister Hermione Granger, calm, precise, her quill stroke reaching into every wand movement, every charm cast, every whispered incantation. Under her authority, magic is not freedom. It is licensed, audited, and archived. Every spell leaves a trace. Every trace leads back to her. The world calls it safety. The world calls it progress. The world does not realize it is living inside a fortress she designed. This is the same witch, they insist, who once sobbed in a girl's bathroom, bushy-haired and overlooked, desperate for friends who did not yet know how to see her. The earnest first year who believed in rules, in teachers, in the comforting illusion that if you studied hard enough, the world would be fair. In this timeline, that image is not wrong. It is simply incomplete, because the true existential risk to wizarding Britain was never Voldemort's theatrical brutality or Dumbledore's oblique secrets. It was the possibility that the brightest witch of her age might look up from her books, measure the chaos around her, and conclude that people are variables, not friends. That loyalty is a sentimental luxury in a world already at war with itself. A mind like hers, unanchored, is not a side character. It is a weapon being polished in the dark. Hermione's canonical virtues become, under pressure, tactically lethal. The relentless study that once earned house points becomes methodical certainty, a catalogue of every spell, curse, and legal precedent that can be bent into leverage. Her rule obsession, once comic, evolves into an instinctive understanding that laws are the skeleton of power. Write them, interpret them, or break them so elegantly that no one can quite prove it. Her hunger for recognition, for the right answer, mutates into a colder demand to be the mind that decides which futures are permissible. And her moral absolutism, that fierce insistence on right and wrong, does not disappear when friendship falters. It sharpens. If the world refuses to be good, then it must be made good, even if it has to be dragged there. The divergence is almost insultingly mundane. A troll in a girl's bathroom. In the familiar story, that night gives her Harry and Ron, and with them a fragile belief that being vulnerable can be safe. In this timeline, rescue arrives late, messy, and humiliating. She survives, but what lingers is not gratitude. It is a single, searing lesson etched into a 12-year-old nervous system. Never be weak. Never be dependent. Never wait for someone else to choose whether you live. From that point, the resonance of every humiliation, the laughter over know-it-all, the dismissal of her warnings, the way adults exploit her competence while ignoring her fear, coalesces into one conclusion. Power is not optional. Power is oxygen. So imagine for a moment a world where Voldemort still fears Dumbledore's legend, and Dumbledore still fears Voldemort's cruelty, but both, slowly, are forced to reckon with a Muggle-born witch who has decided that power, not loyalty, is the only rational choice, and who is quietly better at their own games than they are. This is not the Slytherin timeline you expected. This is the story of the apex predator, everyone misjudged. And it begins in that bathroom, with a girl on a cracked tile floor, realizing that friendship is negotiable, but control is not. The night of the troll, when humiliation replaces gratitude. The bathroom is colder than she remembers it later. Not dramatic, dungeon cold, clinical, tiled cold, the kind that seeps through robes and into bone. The floor is slick where the sinks have overflowed, the air thick with the sour stench of troll sweat and sewage. A primitive reek that has no place in her carefully catalogued world of textbooks and timetables. When the club comes down, it is not heroic. It is clumsy, terminal, accompanied by a grunt and the whistle of displaced air. Hermione does not see her life flash before her eyes. She sees gaps. Every spell she has read, but not mastered. Every dueling manual she has not yet found. Every moment she wasted trying to impress professors who will not be here when the world ends in a bathroom stall. Fear is there, yes, but it is laced with a sharper toxin, the humiliating clarity of her own helplessness. Harry and Ron arrive in a blur of shouting and bad spell work. The sink shatters, the troll bellows, stone chips sting her face. Even as they drag her away from the swinging radius of that club, Hermione is acutely, viscerally aware that the outcome of this encounter does not belong to her. Survival is an external variable. Her life is a function of other people's recklessness. In canon, we are told this is the night a friendship is forged. They are wrong. In this timeline, the aftermath curdles. Standing before McGonagall, listening to Harry and Ron stumble through their half-truths, Hermione feels heat rising in her cheeks. Not the warmth of gratitude, but the burn of exposure. She, Hermione Jean Granger, the girl who memorized Hogwarts, a history before arrival, reduced to a cliché, the hysterical first year who had to be saved. She imagines Malfoy's smirk when he hears the lazy drawl with which he will recount the story in the Slytherin common room, and beneath it, like a curse not yet spoken aloud, the word already lodged in her memory from the train. Mudblood. It sits in her like shrapnel. Every grateful look she is supposed to give Harry and Ron scrapes against it. Gratitude, she realizes, is just another form of debt, and debt is leverage surrendered. This will be the last time, she decides, with almost physical precision, that her continued existence depends on anyone else's bravery or kindness. Friendship, charming as it appears in stories, is a liability, a variable she cannot control. That decision does not arrive as a melodramatic vow. It arrives as an equation. Later that night, while the tower settles into uneasy silence, Hermione lies awake and begins to construct what she will later name, with private irony, the equation. Every event is reduced to inputs and outputs, power acquired, information gained, vulnerabilities exposed. Feelings are acknowledged only as statistical noise. to be minimized. If she had known more curses, the troll would have fallen. If she had known more about the castle's layout, she would never have been cornered. If she had been less invested in being liked, she would have left the bathroom the moment the argument began. This is the quiet birth of a new Hermione, not a Gryffindor sidekick, but a weapon being polished in the dark, a masterpiece to be molded by her own hand. The Slytherin timeline does not need to sort her into a different house. It only needs this recalibration of value. Recognition is no longer the goal. Authority is. So, while the boys sleep, dreaming perhaps of adventure, Hermione sits alone in the common room, the fire a low, watchful glow. Ink stains her fingers as she turns pages in the restricted section catalogue she has accidentally kept too long, tracing titles that promise not comfort but control. She is not looking for stories anymore. She is running projections, and somewhere between a treatise on ancient wards and a commentary on soul resonance in binding magic, she finds the first hint of a path that will make trolls and boys with wands irrelevant. The war for her future has already begun. The next move is simply to choose her battlefield. Rewriting first year, the Philosopher's Stone as a case study in control. Her battlefield, at 11, is not a dungeon or a forest. It is a timetable, a castle, and a set of rules she refuses to let rule her. In this timeline, the social isolation that once cracked open into friendship instead calcifies into policy. Hermione remains impeccably polite to Harry and Ron. Answers offered, homework corrected, spells explained with clinical precision, but there is no warmth in the exchanges, only transactional clarity. They experience her as an inexhaustible resource. She experiences them as volatile elements in an experiment, variables to be controlled or quarantined. When Ron mocks her, when Harry shrugs off yet another rule, she does not cry in a bathroom. She updates her model of human unreliability. The troll incident still happens, but it does not give her friends. It gives her data. She watches McGonagall's fury, Quirrell's performance of terror, Dumbledore's measured authority, and she understands that chaos is the one force capable of dragging adults off script. Fear moves the fortress. That night, she lies awake not replaying Ron's insult, but tracing patrol routes, door wards, and the gaps that allowed a mountain troll to stroll through a school allegedly safer than Gringotts. Hogwarts, to her, becomes less a home and more a breached citadel. From there, the Philosopher's Stone is not an adventure she is dragged into. It is a case study she designs. While Harry and Ron chase rumours and Hagrid's offhand comments, Hermione is in the library cross-referencing staff, hiring records, alchemical treatises, and ward theory. She charts when Snape leaves meals early, when Quirrell's stammer worsens, when Dumbledore vanishes from the high table. She is, quietly, mapping Hogwarts like a strategist, dissecting a fortress, every corridor and password another variable in a growing equation. The so-called trio only exists on parchment. In practice, she is the architect, and they are field assets who don't realize they are being deployed. Her relationship to rules undergoes the same inversion. Canon paints her as the archetypal prefect in waiting. They are wrong. Here, rules are no longer moral commandments, but blades and shields. a weapon being polished in the dark. She files complaints with methodical certainty when Draco steps over a line, not from outrage, but to establish a documented pattern. She quotes the school charter to McGonagall to secure library access, then buries her real interests inside a mountain of innocuous reading. Every regulation is scrutinized for loopholes she can exploit, while remaining technically blameless. When she finally assembles the outline of the stone plot, she does not rush to warn anyone. She runs scenarios. If Quirrell succeeds, the school is plunged into chaos and the ministry descends. That chaos would be catastrophic, but also revealing. If Dumbledore is hiding a legendary artifact beneath a school, that is leverage, proof that the man who embodies moral authority is perfectly willing to endanger children for his own war. Either outcome is intolerable, and yet either outcome is information. Knowledge is power. She intends to own the full picture before she moves a single chess piece, which is how she comes to stand alone before the mirror of Erised. Harry, in canon, sees family. In the Slytherin timeline of Hermione's mind, the glass reflects a different future. An older Hermione in austere robes, surrounded by shelves, not only of books, but of codified laws, charters, treaties. Wands are bowed, not in adoration, but in procedural obedience. The wizarding world arranged with geometrical precision around her will. It is a masterpiece to be molded, a civilization held in place by her intellect, like planets in orbit. She studies this vision with the same clinical gaze she once turned on her textbooks. And she does not flinch. The mirror does not tempt her away from herself. It confirms her trajectory. She walks out of that chamber with a new hypothesis, that the war for her future will not be won in classrooms or common rooms, but in the machinery of power itself, and that friendship, unless properly contained, is a structural weakness. The power framework, how Hermione turns knowledge into a weapon system. From that moment, her reflection becomes a blueprint rather than a comfort. Hermione does what she has always done in crises. She systematizes. If the war for her future will be fought in the machinery of power, then power itself must be dissected, labeled, and filed until it can be pulled like a blade from a scabbard. In this timeline, she constructs a private taxonomy with the same methodical certainty she once reserved for arithmancy tables. Legal power sits first in her schema. Rules, decrees, school policies, the dense lattice of written authority that most students ignore as background noise. She does not. Every Hogwarts bylaw, every examination regulation, every obscure clause in the Board of Governors charters becomes, in her notes, a lever waiting for the right fulcrum. Law is not morality. Law is a programmable constraint system. Next comes symbolic power, reputation, grades, house points, prefect badges, the intangible currencies that move faster than galleons. The world believes Hermione craves marks for their own sake. They are wrong. In her ledgers, an O on an exam is not a gold star. It is a public signal that nudges professors, prefects, and even portraits into treating her as reliable authority. A reputation for obedience is simply collateral for future rebellion. Arcane power is where her peers imagine her heart lies. Spells, artifacts, the raw magical capacity to reshape the world. She catalogues it with clinical distance. Every charm is indexed not by difficulty, but by control vector. Does it bind, reveal, transform, or destroy? The invisibility cloak, the time turner, even the mirror itself are no longer wonders. They are entries in a growing arsenal, each tagged with conditions of use and potential for escalation in war. Finally, there is informational power, secrets, histories, gossip, the living memory of the castle. Here, Hermione becomes quietly, tactically lethal. She begins obsessive note-taking on staff behavior, recording who favors which student, who drinks too much at Christmas, whose hands shake when Voldemort is mentioned. She maps the corridors, not just as stone, but as rumor flows and bottlenecks of silence. The library becomes less a sanctuary and more a listening post. Her own traits are reinterpreted through this schema. Compulsive studying is no longer about being the brightest witch of her age. It is an arms race, a weapon being polished in the dark. Rule following becomes a deliberate investment in institutional trust, a slow acquisition of credit with Dumbledore, McGonagall, even the Ministry, so that when she finally needs to bend those institutions, their reflex will be to yield. Inside her mind, a fortress rises. Each fact is a stone in the wall, each law a portcullis she can raise or drop on an opponent. Each precedent a murder hole through which she can pour consequences. Feelings are identified as structural weaknesses: loyalty to Harry, anger at injustice, the aching need to belong, are catalogued like cracks in the masonry, to be reinforced with rationalizations or sealed off behind occlumency exercises borrowed from whispered Slytherin techniques. In the Slytherin timeline, and at the outermost ring of that citadel, she begins to trace the contours of borderline dark magic, not out of sadism, but out of completeness. A true sovereign, she reasons, must understand every weapon that might be turned against her, or by her. The unforgivables remain distant stars on her map, but lesser curses, binding rituals, and memory-rending hexes are logged, theorized, and, occasionally, tested in controlled conditions. What happens when a conscience is not erased, but subordinated to a framework like this? The answer will surface the first time Hermione is handed real authority and decides whether it serves justice, or whether justice will now serve her. Year 2 reforged, the Chamber of Secrets, as a laboratory of fear. Authority comes to Hermione in second year, not as a badge, but as an insult, carved into the air. Mudblood does not shatter her. In this timeline, it crystallizes her. Where the canon girl dissolves into tears and righteous anger, this Hermione experiences something colder, a moment of methodical certainty as she files the word away under a mental heading, core motivator, and recognizes that blood status is not only prejudice, but currency. If the world is going to run on this currency, then she will learn the exchange rates. She stops hearing mudblood as a wound and begins treating it as data. Who uses it freely? Who flinches? Who pretends not to hear? Each slur maps an invisible network of allegiance and fear. Gryffindor idealism tells her to oppose the system. The Slytherin timeline logic, whispering through her late-night reading, suggests a darker option. Understand the system so completely that one day she can reprice it. The chamber attacks provide her first real laboratory. While the castle panics, Hermione studies victims, house affiliations, blood status, routes taken, times of day. She charts them with the grim focus of a war scholar, tracing casualty reports. She notes which professors tighten discipline and which retreat into bureaucratic platitudes. She clocks how quickly the Ministry attempts to assert control and how easily Dumbledore is removed when fear requires a sacrifice. The basilisk is horrifying, yes, but more importantly, it is a case study in how terror redistributes authority inside a fortress that was supposed to be safe. Polyjuice Potion, in canon, is a reckless adventure. Here, it becomes a controlled experiment in identity theft. Hermione does not simply want to know if Malfoy is the heir. She wants to test how malleable social reality becomes when appearances can be rewritten at will. Brewing in a flooded bathroom, she is not just breaking rules, she is calibrating a future arsenal. If a 12-year-old girl can walk into the heart of Slytherin unchallenged by wearing another boy's face, then titles, reputations, and even bloodlines are revealed as costumes. Useful, disposable, and tactically lethal. The irony is merciless. For all her calculations, she ends the year petrified, frozen mid-flight in the library, a brilliant mind reduced to a tableau, a weapon being polished in the dark, suddenly locked in glass. In that suspended silence, she becomes an object in someone else's legend. The monsters, the boy heroes, the headmasters. When the mandrake draught finally drags her back into the world, she smiles for the cameras of concern, but internally she drafts a new axiom: never again. She does help Harry solve the mystery, that much the official story records. They are wrong about what else happens. In the margins of her notes, Hermione begins a private dossier. How Dumbledore allowed a cursed artifact into a child's cauldron. How the Ministry preferred optics to intervention. How Lucius Malfoy weaponized a book and walked away untouched. Each failure is catalogued not as outrage, but as leverage, a masterpiece to be molded later. The chamber is sealed, the term resumes, the castle exhales. Hermione does not. She has glimpsed how easily children can be sacrificed to narrative, and the next time the war presses its shadow against Hogwarts, she intends to be the author, not the casualty. The question is no longer whether she will use that dossier, it is who she will choose to break with it first. Pattern break. What if Hermione chose Slytherin without moving houses? The dossier waits. Her anger waits. What changes now is Hermione's understanding of where she truly belongs. The wizarding world assumes the Sorting Hat's hesitation was a polite debate between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, between intellect and bravery, between books and boldness. They are wrong. In this timeline, the Hat's pause is a razor-thin calculation between Gryffindor and Slytherin, between open heroism and covert authority, and it chooses the lion not to define her, but to disguise her. The Hat does not misplace Hermione Granger, it embeds her. On that stool, its voice curls into her mind with a different script. It does not flatter her cleverness, it questions her tolerance for powerlessness. It shows her a flash of green and silver corridors, of alliances traded like galleons, of war planned in whispers. Then it offers her something colder, Gryffindor as a shield, a public narrative that will let her study those same Slytherin methods without the stain of their reputation. She chooses red and gold with methodical certainty, not as identity, but as camouflage. From then on, Hermione weaponizes her house placement with clinical precision. To the professors, she is the model lion, punctual, rule-conscious, devastatingly prepared, the muggle-born who proves the system works. To Harry and Ron, she is the loyal friend who will risk detention and expulsion for their survival. Both images are true. Both are incomplete. Underneath the scarlet scarf, a quieter curriculum unfolds. Case studies in manipulation, precedent, and leverage. She watches Slytherin House the way a strategist watches an enemy fortress. In the Great Hall, she tracks who glances at whom before speaking, which surnames make McGonagall's jaw tighten, which owls arrive with heavy parchment and wax seals bearing crests that sit on ministry boards. Blood purity rhetoric, she realizes, is not merely hatred, it is marketing, a soul resonance for frightened aristocrats, a smokescreen for raw power politics conducted in ancestral drawing rooms. She writes none of this down. She remembers everything. Here, the pattern breaks. We are no longer observing a sidekick learning courage. We are watching a tactically lethal mind audition ideologies. Every rule she enforces in public becomes a precedent she can later weaponize in private. Every detention Harry earns is a data point about how far Dumbledore will bend for his chosen hero. Every act of bravery is dual-coded. That dual coding becomes her central operating system. When she helps Hagrid with Buckbeak, adults see noble compassion. Hermione records which governors flinch at Lucius Malfoy's threats, and which merely pretend to. When she founds the DA, the world applauds youthful resistance. She is quietly mapping who will follow Harry into illegal war, and who will fold under pressure. Each favor she grants, each secret she keeps, is logged, not as sentiment, but as future obligation. In this Slytherin timeline of the mind, Hermione does not stand beside the heroic narrative. She infiltrates it, the hidden serpent in the lion's den, a weapon being polished in the dark, while everyone applauds the shine of the sword she pretends to be. Time as a weapon, the time turner and Hermione's first taste of sovereignty. The first real crack in Hermione's faith in authority does not come from Umbridge or the Ministry. It arrives in a quiet office, in the form of a delicate hourglass on a chain. In canon, we are told it is about extra classes and academic enrichment. They are wrong. In this timeline, the time turner is Hermione Granger's first incontrovertible proof that the adults guarding this world are willing to hand state-sanctioned temporal power to a stressed third year, offer a few clipped warnings, and call that oversight. The revelation is brutal in its simplicity. If this is how they treat time, what else have they been lying about? McGonagall's explanation becomes, in retrospect, an indictment. Restricted device, special permission, Dumbledore's approval. Hermione listens, and beneath the surface panic about schedules and exams, another current forms, a cold analytical hum that feels like soul resonance with the very concept of control. Time, the one variable no spell can normally touch, has been placed in her hands like an extra textbook. Authority, she realizes, is less a fortress and more a facade. At first, she obeys the script. She rotates the hourglass to attend arithmancy and ancient runes, maintaining the illusion of the overworked, rule-abiding prodigy. But Hermione has already learned, from trolls and basilisks, that survival belongs to those who test the boundaries. So she begins with micro-experiments, a conversation with Snape, repeated 3 times, each with a different tone and level of deference, to map how his perception shifts. A question in McGonagall's class, asked once timidly, once confidently, once challengingly, to see which version of Hermione earns access, trust, or subtle hostility. She starts logging outcomes with methodical certainty, which answers lead to praise, which missteps vanish if rewound by 5 minutes, which insults from classmates can be preempted by arriving 12 seconds earlier to occupy a seat. In this Slytherin timeline of the mind, she is no longer merely enduring school, she is optimizing it, sculpting her academic and social footprint with clinical precision. Every hour becomes a laboratory, every interaction a controlled trial. The psychological impact is immediate and corrosive. Once you have lived the same hour 3 ways and chosen the best outcome, ordinary linear time feels crude, almost barbaric. Cause and effect cease to be an iron chain and become clay. Hermione begins to experience the present not as a single unfolding reality, but as one branch among many she might have taken had she been allowed one more turn of the glass. She tastes sovereignty, not over people yet, but over sequence. Then Buckbeak and Sirius Black shatter even the pretense of legality. In canon, that night is framed as a desperate rescue guided by Dumbledore's wisdom. In this timeline, Hermione watches the headmaster's instructions with a strategist's eye. Illegal, unrecorded time travel, a direct subversion of a ministry execution and a prison sentence. No paperwork, no audit trail. The lesson is stark. The law is binding only on the powerless. For those who stand slightly outside the stream of time, rules are negotiable. When the time turner is finally reclaimed, the official narrative speaks of relief, of lifted burdens and restored normalcy. Hermione does not feel relief. She feels dispossession. Something in her has expanded to fill those multiplied hours, and now the world demands it shrink back into a single obedient line. She cannot unknow how malleable events become when given even a modest temporal lever. The time turner is gone. The appetite it awakened is not. Hermione files away the sensation of standing above the clock, and she begins, quietly, to search for other ways to reclaim that vantage point, other forms of power that let her rearrange outcomes, with or without the ministry's permission. Year 4. Reputation, humiliation, and the birth of the public Hermione. Hermione's first real experiment in changing outcomes had been temporal, hidden in the quiet tick of enchanted gears. The next would be visible, incandescent, and mercilessly public. The Yule Ball arrives not as a frivolity, but as a test. In this timeline, Hermione treats it with the same methodical certainty she once reserved for arithmancy proofs. Hours disappear into potions manuals and cosmetic charms. She cross-references French witching magazines with old Hogwarts portraits, calibrating every element, robes, hair, posture, as if she is constructing a legal argument with fabric and light. When she descends the staircase on Victor Crumb's arm, there is a moment, a single suspended beat, where the great hall's collective intake of breath feels like power made audible. Then it fractures. Ron's jealousy is not an amusing tangle of adolescent feelings. It is a reminder that, even radiant, she is being read as an accessory, a prize passed between boys with reputations that already matter more. Victor, for all his fame, proves strategically limited, kind, but incurious about the world beyond Quidditch and war stories, unable to recognize the mind beside him as a masterpiece to be molded into something greater than a trophy date. The high collapses into a cold audit. Beauty can command attention, but not yet authority. Rita Skeeter finishes the lesson. The article is a caricature, but the effect is not. One morning's daily prophet, and suddenly, professors glance at her with prurient curiosity. Beauxbaton's girls whisper, and even Hagrid stammers half-embarrassed condolences. Hermione watches, with a scholar's precision, how a single narrative, repeated at breakfast tables across Britain, rewrites who she is allowed to be. Reputation, she realizes, is volatile, but tactically lethal in the right hands. Canon would have her respond with righteous outrage and a jam jar. They are wrong. Here, the outrage is merely the ignition point for study. She combs the library not only for animagus theory, but for media law, profit ownership structures, the financial web binding Fudge, Lucius Malfoy, and the Papers Board. Tracking Rita becomes less a schoolgirl vendetta and more a seminar in information warfare. Circulation numbers, libel thresholds, how many witnesses it takes to make a lie functionally true. When she finally traps the beetle, she does not simply imprison a journalist, she acquires a file. Rita's secrets, contacts, and habits become leverage. In Hermione's hands, the jar is not a moral victory, it is a weapon being polished in the dark. From this point, a new persona crystallizes. Public Hermione emerges, measured, composed, and relentlessly curated. Her answers to reporters are brief, morally upright, but deliberately vague. She stands beside Harry at key moments, close enough that every photograph frames her as his conscience and indispensable advisor, yet never so prominent that the prophet can accuse her of grasping. When Harry faces dragons and merfolk, she ensures her own acts of bravery are visible at the margins. Spells cast just within the crowd's line of sight. Solutions whispered in ways that can be plausibly denied yet widely rumoured. By June, Hogwarts itself has become her first laboratory in narrative control, a small fortress of perception where she tests how rumour, silence, and spectacle interact. Cedric Diggory's death shatters the school, but not her clarity. She grieves, of course she does, but even through red-rimmed eyes she observes which voices are amplified in crisis. Dumbledore's grave warnings, Fudge's denial, Harry's shaking testimony. Soul resonance hums beneath the chaos. The Slytherin timeline is teaching her that wars are not only fought with wands, but with who gets believed. As Voldemort rises back into the world, Hermione makes a quiet, chilling resolution. She will not merely survive the coming war, she will narrate it. And somewhere, beyond Hogwarts, other narrators are already sharpening their quills. The Umbridge regime, how oppression teaches Hermione the architecture of power. Umbridge arrives as if the Ministry has weaponized a tea cozy. On the first night, as her heels click toward the podium, and the hall drowns in that suffocating pink, Hermione is already cataloguing. The lace, the bows, the simper, camouflage. The speech, however, is a different animal. When Umbridge denounces progress for progress's sake, Hermione hears the subtext with methodical certainty, a declaration that change will now be centrally rationed, that experimentation will be framed as threat, that tradition will be the velvet curtain drawn over a steel cage. The students hear an annoying bureaucrat. In this timeline, Hermione hears the architecture of power clearing its throat. As the term unfolds, the educational decrees become her unintended syllabus. Decree after decree appears in the corridor, each framed like a harmless administrative adjustment, yet every line quietly transfers discretion from individuals to a faceless authority. She tracks them the way other students track Quidditch scores, building a private ledger, which freedoms are removed publicly, which are strangled by implication, which are enforced by surveillance rather than explicit ban. It is a slow constriction of autonomy masquerading as restoration of order, and she studies its cadence the way she once studied arithmancy charts. They are wrong to think she is only outraged. She is also learning. A blueprint is being drafted in her mind. One she will later invert, at least that is what she tells herself, preserving the efficiency of central control while promising a different moral payload. The Slytherin timeline does not merely radicalize her politics, it gives her a clinical fascination with how a fortress of rules can be raised, brick by brick, around a population that still believes it is free. Within that tightening net, the DA is no longer just rebellion. It is proof of concept. If Umbridge can hollow out Hogwarts from the top down, Hermione will build a parallel institution from the shadows up. She designs curriculum with the precision of a weapons engineer, escalating difficulty, cross-disciplinary drills, paired casting to build soul resonance between members. Attendance is mandatory once you join. Hierarchy is explicit, and information flows along channels she controls. This is not a club, it is a prototype. The contract she drafts for the DA marks a quiet, irreversible crossing. In canon, it is a clever safeguard. Here, she allows the ink to bite deeper. The jinx that scars traitors is calibrated to hurt, to humiliate, to make an example. A little fear, she reasons, is a negligible cost against the existential risk of betrayal. After all, Umbridge is already using fear. Hermione simply refuses to be the only combatant fighting with bare hands in a war of instruments. The pattern interrupts itself one afternoon in her own mind. When did protection become preemptive punishment? She does not answer. Instead, she watches. In the windowless detentions where the blood quill carves words into trembling hands, Hermione is horrified. But not only horrified, she is attentive, mapping which tools must one day be forbidden outright, and which, in darker moments, might be quietly adapted. As Umbridge smiles over lines written in living blood, Hermione's gaze does not flinch. A weapon being polished in the dark is watching another, cruder weapon at work, and she is already calculating how, when this regime falls, its methods will not vanish, only change owners. War calculus, Hermione's cold logic in the order of the Phoenix. War, when it finally steps out of theory and into the corridor outside your bedroom, demands a new geometry of thought. At Grimmauld Place, the Order sees a tragic home reclaimed from darkness. Hermione Granger, in this timeline, sees a badly configured operations centre wearing the corpse of a family. Her first tour is not sentimental. It is architectural. Staircases become potential choke points, the tapestry hall a surveillance corridor, the kitchen a secure briefing cell buried deep under layers of ancestral paranoia. The Black family's madness, to Sirius a source of shame, reads to her as legacy infrastructure. Old wards, old secrets, old leverage. Sirius himself, she quietly classifies as a compromised asset. Emotionally volatile, spatially confined, tactically lethal only in short, carefully managed bursts. A weapon, yes, but one that points in every direction at once. Around the long table, Dumbledore presides, with his usual blend of grave warmth and deliberate opacity. In the Slytherin timeline, Hermione no longer mistakes that opacity for absent-mindedness. Each omission is logged, each deflection cross-referenced. When he speaks of protecting Harry by withholding information, she notes the pattern: control disguised as care, secrecy framed as necessity. Respect remains, worship dies. A quiet, expanding file opens in her mind where Dumbledore is not merely mentor, but variable, ally. Now, potential obstacle later, an old general who may not be allowed to dictate the endgame. The prophecy accelerates this recalibration. To the Order, it is scripture. To Harry, a noose. To Hermione, it is data wrapped in theatre. Words about neither can live are, to her, less divine decree than narrative weapon. A tool that can galvanize or paralyze depending on who wields it. In private strategy sessions, she urges Harry to treat it as one data point in a larger model, not as the axis around which his soul must revolve. Destiny, she argues with methodical certainty, is merely what the survivors will later pretend was inevitable. This shift bleeds into every tactical discussion. When the Order debates extra guard rotations for individual families, Hermione redirects to asset concentration. Protect the prophecy. Protect key intelligence holders. Maintain wand-ready healers. And curse breakers. Some losses, she states with unnerving calm, are the price of any war worth winning. The room recoils. They are wrong, she thinks, to believe that sentiment can be scaled across a battlefield. The Department of Mysteries proves her right and wrong in the same night. As Harry drowns in guilt and Sirius falls through the veil, Hermione lies in St. Mungo's and replays the battle as if it were a corrupted simulation. Which shield charms held under crossfire? Which formations collapsed once friendship overrode training? Which split-second choices? Neville's loyalty, Ginny's recklessness, her own reflex to shield Harry rather than the prophecy, introduced fatal variables. In the sterile hospital silence, grief is acknowledged, then bracketed. Next time, she swears, emotional attachments will be accounted for in the plan, or excised from it. Dark Tool's bright mind, Hermione's borderline magic, and ethical drift. Excising attachments becomes, predictably, an academic project. Hermione does not begin with curses. She begins with precedent. In the quiet after Ginny's death and Dumbledore's fall, she revisits her own canon transgressions like entries in a research log, the illegal brewing of polyjuice, the hexes she layered on Marietta Edgecombe, the way she once organized the DA as a parallel authority structure under Umbridge's nose. In this timeline, these are not adolescent rebellions, they are early trials, proof that rules are negotiable when the outcome is strategically sound. Her mind catalogues each success with methodical certainty. The canary hex that once expressed wounded pride becomes a prototype for pain without marks. The DA's enchanted coins, originally a clever communication network, are reinterpreted as the first iteration of a distributed surveillance grid. She is, without admitting it yet, a weapon being polished in the dark, testing edges on those who underestimate her. The memory charm on her parents is the pivot. Canon remembers it as a tearful act of love. They are wrong. Here, she plans it like a campaign. She drafts contingencies, cross-references obliviation theory with identity magic, and designs a cascade of false memories that will withstand both ministry inquiry and casual legilimency. When she stands behind them in their sitting room, wand raised, she is not just protecting them from the war, she is severing liabilities from the board. She documents everything: spell structure, emotional resonance, the way a single altered recollection ripples outward to reconfigure an entire life narrative. In her notes, kept in a warded journal that would make any unspeakable envious, one phrase repeats: identity is malleable infrastructure. For the greater good, it can be edited. The Slytherin timeline does not create that thought, it merely gives it permission. From there, curses become inevitable. She does not start by casting unforgivables, she anatomizes them. In the rebuilt Hogwarts library, half ruined from earlier battles, she reconstructs their theory from fragments. The binding logic of the Imperious, the soul resonance that makes the Cruciatus effective, the metaphysical rent of the killing curse. Officially, she is researching countermeasures for Harry's future fortress state. Privately, she is mapping the outer perimeter of what might one day be permissible. Surveillance magic follows as a practical extension. The DA coins are upgraded, tuned to track location, emotional spikes, even brief snatches of spoken passwords. Listening wards lace the corridors leading to strategic chambers. Portraits become unwilling informants. On minor adversaries, obstructive bureaucrats, wavering allies, a particularly stubborn Slytherin holdout, she tests subtle compulsion charms, nudging votes, softening resistance, rewriting hesitation as loyalty. Each time, she tells herself the same thing: better a guided mind than a dead body. The question shifts. It is no longer, is this right? It becomes, what can I do and still look like the hero? As Harry's regime hardens and the world leans on her competence, the answer expands. Publicly, she is the bright witch who tames excesses. Privately, she is a masterpiece to be molded by her own hand, edging closer to tactically lethal ethics. The cliff arrives quietly in the margin of a research page when she realizes there is only one boundary she has not yet diagrammed: what she would do if Harry himself became the variable to be controlled. Fracturing the golden trio. When power and loyalty finally collide, she does not begin with Ron. The first variable she tests is Harry. In the half-light of the Deathly Hallows winter, with the tent a sagging canvas fortress against a world methodically collapsing, Hermione has already mapped the mission in columns and contingencies. Food is scarce, tempers thinner, the radio a metronome of casualties. Ron seethes, Harry broods, but Hermione's mind remains a blade, honed to a methodical certainty that no one else in this timeline can match. They think she is holding them together. They are wrong. She is holding the mission together, and the boys are, at best, volatile assets. Ron's flares of jealousy, Harry's martyrdom impulse. These are not just emotional irritations now, they are quantifiable risk factors. In her beaded bag between Horcrux notes and wandwork theory, a separate parchment has appeared. 3 names, 3 columns, projected survival odds, written in a cramped, merciless hand. The breaking point arrives on a wet, wind-shredded night when Ron explodes. About the food, about the aimless wandering, about Harry's supposed special treatment. Canon remembers pleading and tears. In the Slytherin timeline, the argument mutates into something colder. Hermione does not beg him to stay. She evaluates him. She lists aloud the missions he has compromised. The locket's influence amplified by his insecurity, the quarrels that cost them days, the way his absence from his family is already a strategic liability Voldemort can exploit. She speaks of risk profile, of operational drag, of how his departure might actually increase their mobility. Ron thinks he is in a lover's quarrel. Hermione has placed him in a performance review. The silence afterward is not just shocked, it is surgical. Ron leaves anyway, but now he does not slam the door on a romance. He flees a tribunal that has weighed him and found him wanting. The emotional wound is the same, yet the resonance is darker. He has been demoted from friend to expendable variable, and he knows it. Harry watches this with a dawning, horrified clarity. For the first time he sees the pattern, the way Hermione has curated what he hears from the wireless, downplaying defeats, emphasizing atrocities that keep his resolve burning, the way she redirects his guilt into action, never into rest, the way she frames every choice as necessity, never as option. A weapon being polished in the dark needs a polisher. The confrontation comes days later by a grey river when the locket hisses too close to his ear and something in him snaps. He accuses her of managing him, of withholding certain risks, about the Hallows, about the likelihood of his own death, to keep him on mission. Hermione does not deny it. She explains, "This is war. Victory outranks comfort. Information is a resource, not a right. If telling him the full statistical likelihood of his sacrifice would endanger the Horcrux hunt, then withholding it is not betrayal, it is strategy. Friendship," she says quietly, "cannot outrank the world." The pattern interrupt lands here. Harry realizes Hermione Granger, the girl who once wept over house elf rights, is now arguing triage with his life at the top of the list. They go on. They hunt. On the surface, the golden trio persists, but something fundamental has cracked along an invisible fault line. Harry begins to understand that when the war ends, Hermione may not be able or willing to retreat from this altitude of authority, to descend from strategist to just a friend. Privately, in the margins of her notes, she no longer even pretends otherwise. The mission has required a masterpiece to be molded, and she has discovered the masterpiece is herself. After the battle, Hermione, the architect of a new ministry, When the war finally ends, the Ministry atrium is unrecognizable, and not only because the Dark Mark statues have been pulverized into dust. In this timeline, the marble floor reflects not golden fountains, but a ceiling of enchanted glass panels, each one a living map of the wizarding world's nervous system. Wand usage flaring like constellations, apparition trails threading cities, magical creature migrations pulsing in slow, luminous tides. It looks like transparency. It is surveillance. Hermione stands beneath it as the war hero the Prophet insists on calling the bright shield of Hogwarts. They are wrong. The girl who once campaigned for house elf rights has learned that moral outrage, without levers of authority, is just noise, and she has no intention of being parked in a ceremonial office with a plaque and no budget. When Kingsley offers her the newly minted Muggle-born Rights Office, she smiles, thanks him, and declines with surgical politeness. Tokens are for people who plan to rest. Instead, she maneuvers, methodical certainty wrapped in bureaucratic courtesy, into the core regulatory organs of the state. She begins in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, ostensibly as an advisor on post-war reform, but within months, her fingerprints appear on revised wand licensing protocols, oral training standards, and the charter of the Improper Use of Magic Office. From there, she threads herself into the Department of Magical Education, arguing that Hogwarts cannot remain a romanticized fortress of tradition. It must become an instrument. The reforms arrive clothed in unimpeachable language. Hogwarts adopts mandatory curricula on critical fallacies and the anatomy of propaganda, taught alongside defense against the dark arts, as if they were simply new branches of the same discipline. Students learn how fear is manufactured, how symbols are weaponized, how a diary became a war. Experimental magic faces strict oversight. Every high-risk ritual, every unstable charm, every prototype curse must be registered, peer-reviewed, and monitored. Most controversial is her registry, not of blood, but of behavior, a living ledger of high-risk spellcasters and artifact holders, calibrated by demonstrated capacity, psychological profile, and historical proximity to dark objects. At first, it feels like a shield. Then, almost imperceptibly, it becomes a net. Protection hardens into preemption as Hermione authorizes raids justified by predictive enchantments that flag arcane volatility risks before a crime is committed. Travel restrictions quietly attach themselves to names whose wand signatures show unusual spikes near prescribed texts or forgotten ruins. The Prophet, still drunk on the narrative of salvation, receives discreet memoranda about responsible narratives and the need to avoid glamorizing vigilante magic. No one calls it censorship. Not yet. From above, the atrium's glass panels watch the world in unblinking silence, a weapon being polished in the dark. To many, Hermione Granger is the savior who has made another Voldemort mathematically impossible, the architect who has turned chaos into a self-correcting system. To others, those who feel the weight of invisible flags on their names, who see how easily risk can be defined, she is the most feared witch of her age, because she has built a world where she decides what fear is justified, and the system itself agrees. The Slytherin timeline does not need a dark lord when it has a bright one. The moral ledger. Is Hermione a benevolent tyrant or necessary guardian? Hermione's world, by this stage, runs on ledgers rather than legends. The Slytherin timeline has produced not a Dark Lord, but an auditor of human behavior, and her balance sheet is written in laws, wards, and quietly broken wills. On one side of that ledger, the case for villainy is brutally clear. Privacy, as the post-war generation understood it, has evaporated. Enchanted quills track spell usage. Floo powder is laced with traceable ash, and Hogwarts itself has become a pedagogical fortress where every corridor hums with discreet detection charms. Surveillance is no longer an exception imposed in crisis. It is the air students breathe, normalized with the methodical certainty of a timetable. Coercive magic, compulsion hexes, calibrated veritaserum derivatives, binding oaths disguised as scholarship contracts, sits behind glass in her legal framework, technically restricted, practically available, whenever a risk profile crosses a red line. In this timeline, individual freedoms are not annihilated in a single theatrical decree. They are shaved down, precedent by precedent, sacrificed to an abstract, almost mathematical conception of safety. Yet the other column is not empty. Under Hermione's order, dark artifact circulation collapses. Nocturne Alley withers into a regulated curiosity, its most dangerous wares seized, catalogued, and neutralized in ministry vaults, redesigned by her own hand. Hate crime incidents against Muggle-borns and magical creatures plummet, not because prejudice has vanished, but because the consequences are swift, inescapable, and procedurally immaculate. The children who pass through her system emerge as the most educated generation of witches and wizards the world has ever seen, drilled in history, counter-curse theory, and ethics with almost fanatical rigor. Voldemort's methods become not merely illegal, but unthinkable, their very architecture dissected in classrooms as a case study in moral and tactical failure. She has made certain that terror as a governing strategy no longer scales. Inside Hermione, the calculus is relentless. She maintains a meticulous moral ledger, a private soul resonance of numbers, graphs, and projected casualty curves. Every new restriction is weighed against a model of what would have happened in the old chaotic world. How many Muggle-borns spared from alleyway executions? How many families that will never know the word orphan in relation to a killing curse? She tells herself that while individual stories may be tragic, the student expelled for forbidden research, the Aurora quietly compelled to testify, the aggregate is merciful. They are wrong, she thinks. Those who accuse her of having forgotten the girl who cried in a bathroom over mudblood, she remembers her perfectly. That girl is the control variable. Compared to her predecessors, Hermione is a disquieting hybrid. Like Dumbledore, she plays the long game, thinking in generations and institutional inertia. Like Voldemort, she is unafraid of decisive action, of using fear as a scalpel when persuasion fails. But where Dumbledore relied on charisma and secrets, and Voldemort on spectacle and pain, Hermione grounds her authority in systems and data, mechanisms that persist when personalities fade. A weapon being polished in the dark until it no longer needs a wielder. So the ledger remains open. Is this the final corruption of the brightest witch of her age, a masterpiece to be moulded, that hardened into marble tyranny? Or is she simply the only adult in a world that has proved again and again it cannot be trusted with its own freedom? The answer may lie not in what she has built, but in the one safeguard she refuses to automate, and the one person she refuses to let the system touch. Alternate endings. 3 fates for a power-first Hermione. The safeguard, as it turns out, is Hermione herself. In this timeline, she refuses to let the machine run without a human mind at its apex, a single consciousness to absorb the guilt, the nuance, the late-night recalibrations when the world is sleeping and the fortress hums like a living organism around her. Scenario 1 is the Iron Reformer. Here, Hermione never relinquishes authority, she refines it. Year by year, she codifies her emergency measures into law, bakes her surveillance into transparent oversight, and turns provisional tribunals into permanent institutions with polite names. She dies in office, quietly, efficiently, between policy briefings, and the system does not even stutter. Children learn about Granger protocols in History of Magic. Half the class assumes she was a saint, half mutter that she was a tyrant. They are wrong. She is both. Her need for recognition has been transmuted into statuary and curriculum, while her fear of helplessness is soothed by a legacy that can no longer be argued with, only inhabited. Her loneliness is buried beneath marble and minutes of meetings. Scenario 2 fractures that methodical certainty. The tragic overreach begins when the resistance stops being theoretical. Ginny, who once trusted Hermione with her trauma after the diary, discovers that old possession records were quietly mined to predict future volatility. Harry, already uneasy with the soul resonance of their shared war, realizes that the woman who saved his life now archives it as data. A leak, perhaps from a disillusioned Auror, perhaps from a house elf who saw too much, exposes the tactically lethal breadth of Hermione's network. Mirrors listening in private homes, quills that flag seditious phrases, travel wards that log every apparition. The confrontation is not a duel, but a siege of legitimacy. Faced with the prospect of civil war, Hermione must choose: double down, branding her former friends as destabilizing assets, or dismantle the very architecture that has made the world feel safe. If she clings to power, her need for recognition curdles into paranoia. If she yields, her fear of helplessness detonates. Either way, the friendship that once anchored her reforms becomes the blade at their throat. Then there is Scenario 3, the voluntary abdication, which reads almost like a ghost story. Older, exhausted, Hermione looks at the apparatus she has built and sees, with terrifying clarity, that it no longer needs her. So she engineers her own obsolescence, self-correcting charters, rotating councils, enchanted audits that trigger, automatically, a masterpiece of distributed authority. She disappears into academic obscurity, vanishing to some Alpine research institute to write abstract treatises on magical ethics, while the world debates whether she is dead, retired, or a weapon being polished in the dark. Here, her commitment to reason and her capacity for self-critique finally outrun her craving for applause. She chooses irrelevance over omnipresence. Each of these endings is a different reading of the same girl in the library, the one who wanted top marks, who hated being wrong, who broke rules when the cause was righteous. The question is not which fate is true, but where, along each trajectory, she ceases to be defensible. Is it the first secret registry, the first silenced protest, or does she, in your eyes, never quite cross the line? That answer will matter when we turn from Hermione's blueprints to the people forced to live inside them. What friendship actually saved Hermione from? Canon, then, becomes less a comforting baseline and more a razor's edge she happened not to slip from. The wizarding world operates under a quieter delusion that Hermione Granger was always destined to be the conscience of the trio, the moral ballast of the war. They are wrong. She was one humiliation, one betrayal, one absent friend away from becoming the architect we have been tracing in this timeline. Return to the troll in the girls' bathroom. In the darker branch, no one comes. Fear calcifies into doctrine. In canon, two terrified boys charge a mountain of flesh with absolutely no plan, choosing her life over their own safety with a kind of reckless, irrational loyalty that has no place in a cost-benefit chart. Forced to lie to a professor to protect them, Hermione's first real friendship is literally born from breaking the rules, not enforcing them. Empathy wins its opening skirmish against efficiency. The pattern repeats in the Polyjuice year. Brewing an illegal, tactically lethal potion in a haunted bathroom is, on paper, exactly the methodical certainty of the Slytherin timeline. Information first, rules later. Yet the canon version derails on a single human detail. Hermione disfigured, hiding behind a curtain, and Ron's horrified, unfiltered reaction. His emotional bluntness punctures her self-image as a flawless problem solver. Harry's willingness to blunder into danger without a plan shows her that courage cannot always be precomposed in the library. They drag her, protesting, toward the idea that people are not variables. Third year should have been her crucible. The time turner is a legal, ministry-sanctioned violation of causality, a weapon being polished in the dark under Dumbledore's benign authority. Overloaded, exhausted, snapping at friends, she comes dangerously close to choosing the schedule over the relationship. But Harry and Ron refuse to treat her as an asset to be optimized. They sulk, they argue, they storm off. The conflict forces her to admit that even perfect planning has human collateral, herself. When she turns the time turner to save Buckbeak and Sirius, it is no longer about academic conquest. It is about mercy. By fifth year, the edge is visible. She forges the DA contracts with painful jinxes, weaponizes secrecy, and is entirely willing to scar Marietta Edgecombe for betrayal. This is Hermione skirting the border of the world we have built, a masterpiece to be molded into pure utilitarianism. Yet Ron's outrage, Harry's discomfort, and the sheer chaos of teenagers in a hidden fortress classroom keep her anchored. She cannot pretend she is designing a clean system. The mess is in her face every meeting. And on the Horcrux hunt, the danger peaks. She obliviates her parents, studies curses, and carries the trio through an alpine wilderness of hunger and paranoia. The locket preys on Ron, not her, but his departure exposes the cold calculus she could embrace. When he returns, Drenched and shaking, it is not logic that takes him back. It is that same irrational loyalty born in a bathroom with a troll. Harry brings courage, Ron brings humanity, Hermione brings intellect. Together, they form a three-part ethical stabilizer. Remove any one, and the remaining two distort into ideology, martyrdom, or control. The Wizarding World never built a statue to Harry and Ron for saving Hermione from herself. Yet, against the silhouette of this alternate Hermione, their overlooked resistance becomes visible. A quiet, stubborn drag back toward being a person rather than a program. The next question is simple and far less comforting. What happens to a world that loses that drag entirely and has only her blueprints left? Why, this what if haunts the Wizarding World more than Voldemort. A world that has only her blueprints left does not wake up under a dark mark. It wakes up under a syllabus. This is why Hermione as sovereign haunts the wizarding imagination more than Voldemort ever could. Voldemort announces himself in skulls and serpents, in open war and cackling declarations of supremacy, whereas she arrives with exam schedules, revised bylaws, standardized wand safety protocols, and a quietly expanded Auror surveillance mandate, all articulated as measures for everyone's protection. The horror is not in obvious evil, it is in methodical certainty wrapped in administrative calm. In this timeline, the instruments of her ascendancy are painfully familiar: committees, reform councils, educational decrees that actually improve test scores even as they narrow acceptable thought. She does not burn the ministry, she audits it. She cross-references arrest records with blood status, rewrites sentencing guidelines, and builds a predictive risk index for magical crime that just happens to flag anyone who resists her order. No skull masks, only clipboards. They are wrong, the ones who insist that true tyranny must look like Voldemort to be recognized. History in our own world refutes them. Surveillance states rarely begin with a madman in a cape. They begin with a clever report, a white paper, a reformer promising to fix corruption and chaos. Highly educated architects design systems to track contagion, to monitor subversion, to preempt terror. At first, the targets are real threats. The resonance with Hermione's arc is uncomfortable precisely because it is so plausible. Her Time Turner years were already a rehearsal. One girl quietly adjusting the timeline, confident that if she scheduled everything correctly, no one would have to suffer. In the Slytherin timeline, that instinct is never tempered by friendship. It is refined into doctrine. She studies dark magic, not to embrace cruelty, but to ensure no one else can ever surprise her with it again, a weapon being polished in the dark, then locked behind her laws. Competence itself becomes the seduction. After a decade of war, of incompetent ministers and compromised headmasters who would not trust the witch who is always right on her OWLs, right about the chamber, right about Horcruxes, right about everything. Her danger lies in the fact that she genuinely is better at solving problems than almost anyone else, and that her solutions work. The trains run on time, the wards hold, the werewolf attacks drop to zero, people sleep inside a fortress of her making and call it peace. Underneath, nothing has changed since that bathroom with the troll. Hermione's deepest terror was never death. It was helplessness, the spectacle of being the girl who could not save herself. In this version, that moment becomes soul resonance, echoing through every policy she writes. Control is her answer to vulnerability. Trust is a luxury she cannot afford. If the world behaves decently only when her hand is on the lever, then the lever can never be released. And this is where the mirror turns. This is not simply a cautionary tale about a witch with too many books and too few hugs. It is an indictment of the quiet conviction many of us harbor, that if only we were in charge, if only the idiots would move aside, everything would finally be fixed. Hermione's blueprint exposes the cost of that fantasy. The next step in this analysis is brutally simple. Follow that fantasy to its logical conclusion and watch who, exactly, is left standing outside her carefully ordered world. Closing the book. Your turn to rewrite Hermione's choice. Hermione's blueprint is the fantasy made visible, and by now you have walked its entire perimeter, from a troll's club raised over a sobbing first year to a quill raised over a ministry decree. In this timeline, the bathroom is not the birthplace of friendship. It is the moment she derives the equation. Never be the weakest person in the room again, and never depend on anyone who can walk away. From there, each canonical mercy becomes a calculation. The time turner is no longer a whimsical academic indulgence. It is her first taste of structural advantage, of living in 2 days while everyone else survives in 1. Umbridge's reign is not just a trauma. It is a revelation that authority can be hijacked from within and rewritten with methodical certainty. The war becomes her final examination, and the post-war ministry her alpine fortress, high, cold, and perfectly defended by precedent, legislation, and fear. You have watched 3 endings crystallize out of that same soul resonance. In one, she is the iron architect of a safer world, trading warmth for order and sleep for surveillance. In another, she is a tragic isolate, having outlived Harry, Ron, and any peer who might call her back from the brink. In the darkest resonance, she is the necessary evil the Wizengamot deserves, a weapon being polished in the dark until there is nothing left of the girl who cried in a bathroom stall. Set beside canon, the dissonance is sharp. The Hermione who once knitted hats for house elves now drafts statutes that bind entire bloodlines. The girl who broke rules to save her friends now breaks people to save the rules. The core tension never changes. The same brilliance, the same capacity for loyalty, tilted by a single altered value, power over friendship. And the result is a world that is safer on parchment and colder in practice. Was the trade worth it? For you, which hinge felt decisive? Was it the humiliation under the troll's shadow, the exhaustion of the time-turner year, the pink tyranny of Umbridge, or the battlefield calculus of the war that finally convinced her that control was kinder than chaos? Which ending feels most plausible to you? Benevolent tyrant, tragic guardian, or undisguised villain wearing legality like a robe? Imagine Draco Malfoy navigating a ministry where Hermione holds the quill. Does he become her loyal technocrat or her first public casualty? Picture Snape confronted with a minister who understands every clause he hides behind. McGonagall watching her star pupil turn Hogwarts into a training ground for compliant citizens. Even Voldemort, forced to reckon with a witch who studies the dark arts, not to resist them, but to regulate them. Return, finally, to the Ministry Atrium. The war is over. The statues have been replaced. Hermione Granger stands before a blank decree, the Slytherin timeline reduced to a single signature. The quill hovers. The world holds its breath. If you had her power, what would you sign into law? If this exploration unsettled you, stay with that unease. Tell us in the comments where you would have turned back, who you think Hermione became, and what law you would refuse to write. Then like, subscribe, and step into our other what-if corridors, because this fortress of alternate histories is only beginning to unfold.